The term no man's land has, in popular culture, become shorthand for an entire war. World War I. The novelist historian John Toland choosing the word as his title for his lengthy history subtitled The Story of 1918. However, no man's land is, in my view, a much more expansive concept that not only includes man-made places, such as the Western Front, but also environmentally made places. Despite popular conceptions, dead ground exists in a large number of places, often nearish to civilization. This includes forests, marshes, mountains, deserts, and deserted islands. In this video, I will expand on the concept of dead ground that I covered in the previous episode in the Soldier vs. Historian series, The Philosophy of the Infantry. I highly recommend that you watch that video first before watching this video, as we will be expanding on the concepts that were covered in that video. In that previous video, we ended with the idea of oak, OC. In this video, we are going to look past one particular aspect of oak, OC and consider militarily significant terrain away from the decisive action. The terrain in the story is very much dead ground, something of a man-made desert left in the wake of hard fighting. As an Iraq War veteran with service in the hinterlands of Diyala province, I can relate to this World War I sidelight that most military historians would dismiss outright as unimportant or not worth their time. I think those historians who would do so are making a huge mistake. Let's get to the story as recounted in The Squadron, Arden Arthur Hume Beeman's account of his experience during World War I. This reading's from The Squadron, page 185 to 188. During our sojourn in that devastated land, we had one strange adventure. Above, 30 German prisoners escaped from a cage some miles away, and the squadron was sent to round them up. We were told at the outset that, owing to the innumerable dugouts, the interminable length of the trenches, and the fact that we could move only on the roads, our task was regarded as hopeless. Nevertheless, we set gaily forth, determined to do our best. As intercommunication in that impassable country was so difficult, and as the area to be searched was so large, we moved on a carefully worked out plan, a plan which it would be tedious to set down here. I accompanied the skipper at the head of the support troop. In one place, with the troop carefully concealed, we watched through our glasses a small copse that had just been searched by the troop ahead. As soon as the last horse of that troop had disappeared, we saw a man in German uniform come to the edge and look around. We formed a line and galloped around the copse, thrilling with excitement and delight at the prospect of having so soon rounded up our quarry. The copse, not more than 50 yards square. The man vanished inside. For an hour we searched every inch of it, the dugouts with which it was honeycombed, and all the open country around, but no sign of a German did we see. Greatly puzzled, we rode away, and then, when out of sight, galloped back under cover of a sunken lane to our first position, where we again watched through our glasses. After a few minutes, a man came out of the copse, a man who must have been hidden there all the time that we had been searching it. Again we galloped across the intervening space, and this time we caught him. But he was a French civilian, the only civilian, in fact, from our village. The first man had been a German, the second a Frenchman, and if both of these had managed to lie hidden during our search, it was possible, nay probable, that all the escaped prisoners were hiding there too, in some cleverly concealed dugout. We could get no information out of our captive. Again we searched the copse, again with no result, and then sending the Frenchman back to billets under an escort, and leaving a guard to watch the baffling copse, we went on our way. As we advanced, the country became more and more difficult. Our progress became slower and slower. Soon we got into the old front system of the Somme, the wildest part of it that I had ever seen. At one bound, the war had rolled on from there to the Hindenburg line. The armies of France had swept over it, and on leaving it behind them, and it was still as they had left it. Here and there were hideously disemboweled factories and machinery all overgrown with grass. Food stores, ammunition, and unburied dead still lay plentiful around. At Fresnes, on the borders of this horrid desolation, we met a salvage company at work. They told us that we were the first people they had seen since they had been there. and they laughed at our mission. That warren of trenches and dugouts extended for untold miles, and we might as well look for a needle in a haystack. They warned us, if we insisted on going further in, not to let any men go singly, but only in strong parties, as the Golgotha was peopled with wild men, British, French, Australian, German, deserters, who lived there underground like ghouls among the moldering dead, and who came out at nights to plunder and to kill. In the night, an officer said, mingled with the snarling of carrion dogs, they often heard inhuman cries and rifle shots coming from that awful wilderness, as though the bestial Dinjins were fighting among themselves. And none of the salvage company ever ventured beyond the confines of their camp after the sun had set. Once they had put out as a trap a basket containing food, tobacco, and a bottle of whiskey. But the following morning they found the bait untouched and a note in the basket. Nothing doing. We proceeded on our way, very much interested by this strange story. The road got worse and worse until at Vermando years, it, the most indestructible of matter, disappeared altogether in the chaos. While waiting here for reports from left to right, we lit a small fire to keep us warm. Shortly after, when night had fallen, a bombing plane passed overhead, and seeing the fire, small as it was, dropped a bomb which burst with a mighty crash and reverberation some 40 yards away, but which happily did us no injury. When reports had come from each troop that they had reached their objectives and had, alas, failed to find the prisoners, we rode dejectedly home. On arrival, we learned that sudden orders had come for an early march on the morrow, so the mystery of the Copse was never solved. So what is my point? My point is that civilian military historians have skewed the term no man's land in popular culture. For some reason today, it is accepted wholesale that the term has, quote, taken its modern sense of zone between opposing forces. I will call this etymologist's definition a half-truth. If nothing else, it reads like classic understatement, ignoring the realities of the situation in a sort of falsely humble fashion. This act of understatement designed to obscure what is otherwise an obvious truth behind a tall tale. To understand my line of thinking, all you need to do is ask yourself this question. Why is climbing Mount Everest or traveling to the Antarctic so controversial? Continuing this line of inquiry, of great interest to us is an article by James Deutsch, a curator of folklore at the Smithsonian. Here we have an actual civilian military historian engaging in the wider definition of no man's land as we have discussed. Yet at the same time, he fails to own up to what is in his mind. Deutsch is applying his folklorist's power of divination, claiming that no man's land is, quote, metaphorical. To me, this is suspicious. Why does he need no man's land to suddenly become metaphorical? This suggests to me that he does not wish to dispel his own naivete. His use of quotes around the term no man's land confirms this suspicion. How hard would it have been for Deutsch to just ask a soldier instead of him applying his own civilian imagination? In order to properly understand no man's land, we must accept that it is not a metaphorical or mythical or imaginary place. These places, inhospitable as they are still subject to the political whims of the neighbors, both past and current, on the adjacent settled lands. Just because you want to go to the South Pole or climb Mount Everest doesn't mean that the caretaking government will let you. Real places with real rules governing their use. I choose the term murky territory for a reason forever lost on many battle-obsessed civilian observers of the military. Military terrain, in the absence of battle, reverts to political territory. Arthur Beeman's story of the devastated area, as recounted in the Squadron, encapsulates this dynamic shift. It is often the duty of an army to engage in this so-called low-intensity conflict that minimizes the need for military terrain in Ocoka and maximizes the need of the political wardens of the territory. Thus we arrive at our practical, if split, description of no man's land. Military no man's land consists of the ground between opposing forces. This ground may be classified into three categories: death ground, dead space, and dead ground. For a full explanation of these three grounds, please see Soldier vs. Historian, Episode 8, The Philosophy of the Infantry. Non-military, or more precisely governed, no man's land consists of two grounds: environmentally created dead ground, think of the Alps, Mount Everest, the Atacama Desert, or Antarctica, and man-made dead ground, think landfills, nature reserves, or training areas. Have you spotted the problem yet? In Arthur Beeman's Mystery of the Copse, we cannot apply the big army or terrain definition because the military action is what today we would characterize as low-intensity conflict, where the battle, if any, would be a quick draw showdown between insignificant military units. We also cannot properly apply the governmental or territory definition, because the conflict itself has broken the existing moral customs and governmental procedures of the territory. Thus we arrive at the crux of this curiosity I'm calling murky territory, a ground that arises from time to time either in the midst of conflict or of extreme hardship. In our World War I story, we have a broken land occupied by scofflaw deserters, yet the term is equally applicable to shipwrecked sailors on a so-called desert island, or anyone who genuinely finds themselves in the so-called middle of nowhere. Thus, no man's land is simply and properly defined as a land beyond the effective range of regulation and control by legitimate authority. So what can we conclude with this definition? Murky territory represents a specific case of no man's land where the only option available is the military, or at least military grade. Unlike any of the cases of disputed territory presented in Margaret Moore's book, murky territory is a land that is inhabited by a non-state, non-national population. In Beeman's story, this is our Babel of deserters. In Druitt's book, this is the cosmopolitan crew of the shipwrecked Grafton. I might also argue that a so-called failed state fits this definition, though I admit this is stretching my own definition somewhat. In any case, mundane, murky territory does exist, in the very midst of civilization. Witness the military helicopter rescues of climbers stranded on the north face of the Eiger. If you take nothing else from this video, understand that no man's land is never metaphorical. It is always real. It is always consequential.